After spending the last few days of grinding up to difficulty 7 with Kayron, how do we feel about him? Well, his ultimate is absolutely gorgeous, and the other attack animations that he has is really next level, but unfortunately his damage does just take a bit too long to get there. Hey everybody, my name is Cosmic. Welcome back to another Chaos Zero Nightmare video, and today we're talking all about Kayron and his builder. Well, and more importantly, the two very different ways to build him that you might be building him incorrectly or building him halfway to maximize his potential. So in today's video, we're going to be giving a quick rundown as well as talking about the partners that I would recommend. So if you want to see more build guides like this, make sure to like and subscribe because it does help out the channel a ton. But with that out of the way, let's dive right in today's video. And up front, let me just put up this image because this will be kind of the golden standard of what I would recommend. And I want to highlight there are going to be actually two different epiphany guides that I am laying out here. Kayron himself does require a little bit of setup, which, as we know, the Twilight Dusk, it does have a limited amount of turns, so it can feel pretty bad to have these more build-up characters like Haru that take just a little bit too long sometimes, it feels, to really make it to where they can shine. However, as more and more people are really starting to figure out, multi-hit in this game is absolutely busted for how it stacks with multiple conditions in the game or buffs you can apply. However, you do have to find them, and that is quite hard to min-max the data. And then the other way to really play this is just the all-in nuke build. This is going to be very similar to our Haru guide video that we did with her anchor shot, where you're going to be getting up to those very easy to find 2k, 3k, 4k, 1000 damage numbers that just require a bit more setup. So how do I feel about him overall, and where are we now? Right, yes, I did try to my best to get the save data that we could, and at least it was usable. And I will say this, even if it's not perfect, right, because it's so early on in the game, we don't have perfect memory fragments, I at least am satisfied from a theory crafting perspective that we have two very clear working builds for Kayron that you have to focus on. Now, of course, one of the challenges that I found out very quickly that I also want to, stress, if you are at the part where you are trying to farm save data to make this work, I'm going to be very honest, if you get your black hole epiphany and it is the wrong one, quit the run. Get out at the next checkpoint, save yourself the headache, and just reset. My biggest regret as I was trying to work towards this, because I was also leveling up the zero system, is that I felt like I had to finish my runs to try to unlock that next map, and as well as get as much chaos orbs as possible. However, very quickly you will realize as you're trying to build this out, if you get one or two wrong epiphanies, then there's no point continuing with that save data. And if you are limited on time, it is just going to be better for you to quit out and go on. Now, again, always finish your chaos runs if you can to try to go for that copy or that big upgrade. But if you are trying to, again, look for either the very specific black hole upgrades, or maybe you have Ray and you're really trying to find her upgraded for void damage, then back out of the run if you unfortunately miss on those. Now, the thing I will say here as well, when we think about the two different memory fragment sets, is that you are going to want to build this based on where you're at in the game itself. And because it's very early on, and because, again, resources are very hard to get this early, and we just don't have perfect memory fragment farming yet, I am just using the very basic void set plus the plus 12% attack. Once we get to endgame, I would definitely expect the vast majority of his damage to be coming from Black Hole if you're doing the burst build, which means you could use actually Haru set for the 2-cost cards, get the additional crit rate, and then of course the crit damage set just makes the most sense beyond that. Early on, it's going to be very difficult to try to get the right amount of substats. Like, just for example, I am working with a void damage one that, it has one right stat, but it does have a decent main stat. So for the sake of trying to push our progression, I did upgrade a lot of these, but I will be perfectly honest that the vast majority of my memory fragments here are either what I would call 0 to 1 hit pieces, where they have 0 to 1 desirable substats, but they did at least have good main stats. So I went ahead and upgraded them where I could, which leads us up to about 740 attack. So for the cards, I'm not going to spend as much time going into them as I did in my Haru video and kind of break it down that way. However, instead, what I'm going to focus on is mostly the two different builds and kind of what makes sense of why I'm suggesting those other partners, or I should say combatants. But really quickly, just for partners, I only have Elise here, so I will be using just the attack card damage plus 10%. And then from a survivability standpoint, the ego skill is very nice. Of course, if you can get the 5-star partner for Kayron that just nukes out all the futilities from your discard pile, It's a huge quality of life improvement for his build. You know, one of the biggest downsides is drawing the right pieces at the right time. And well, that kind of brings me to the point that I wanted to make. Now, Mika should be no surprise for the characters that we have overall. She is going to be our AP generator. But what's most important about this as we think about cards like Rally, or as we think about cards like Gearbox, which is the combo exhaust draw 2, Kayron, in both versions of his build, your turn 1, if you can set it up, is going to be quite literally drawing through your entire deck and playing all the upgrades so that on turn 2, or maybe you're doing like the burst build and you finally retain, right? So on turn 2, you can start doing damage immediately. So having things like Rally are very important. However, what's most notably here is trying to truly min-max this as much as possible, which means that we have the morale buff, which is going to give you a flat plus 20 damage on your card. So again, just for the sake of going back to Kayron and showing the card itself, right? This has a very low starting value. However, it does go up to 5 hits. And the monster card that I got as well, which is also just a multi-hit, that is just very good for stacking your damage. So you're going to look at this card, and you're going to say, why on earth would I ever bother with this, right? Just for example, if we're using the morale buff and you have multiple rallies, or if you have the monster card that is generating it, right? There's multiple ways to get epiphanies that give you morale. 5 stacks of that is going to make this into a 168 times 5 style of attack, which is fine. However, this is where we want to start with Ray and really get into what she has to offer. Now, keep in mind, for the sake of the 2 different builds, I'm going to talk all about the multi-attack hit one here, and then I'll get into the burst conversation. One of the important parts is that it is very AP expensive. So, I got to give a shout out here to her ego skill, which does give you an extra action point, which is really important in a lot of different scenarios. But one of the most important things that we'll note here is you want to find the Resonating Darkness that is going to give you the plus 40 damage for Void cards, meaning that is then going to take that 68 up to 108, and you're going to start to see how this is slowly coming together. It's an upgrade, so it's going to thin out our deck while giving us, again, because the attack is going to hit 5 times, this one upgrade is a 200% damage increase for that card. Now, of course, we get more multi-hit cards like the monster card that I mentioned. I think that one is only a ×4, so it's 160% damage boost in that case. But the other big pieces for us too are going to be snack time, which again, we're just trying to draw. We're just trying to filter. Now, this one I'm a little bit torn on because I have found out the hard way that the select 2, this does not say up to, because as a card player, we're used to having things that say up to the number. So I did unfortunately have to exhaust one of my heals when I was playing this. But this is nice because it allows you to tutor, or again, select a void card to draw from your deck. However, just because of how it's working, kind of what I would expect to see is just the, exhaust 2, draw 2, or something that has just the retain, so you can set up the combo when you want it, right? We want to try to draw as many cards as possible so we can set up this buff. But the last card that we have to talk about really that just brings this all together is to have her boosted damage. And again, in this case, it is a card that can buff the damage by 100% in this case. So we are now able to turn this into a 500% damage boost off of this 1 AP. Now, again, keeping in mind that we are going to be looking for ways to burn through our deck, get a 4 or even 5 action point generation turn, and then do a all-in nuke on this card. So again, because this allows us to get the plus 100 attack to any card we want, we are now very quickly able to take this black hole that is then going to be able to go up to, let me get the right one, right? It is now going to be able to go up to a 450 or 550 damage attack, again, ×5. So now we're hitting for the same amount of damage that our Haru was hitting for in our previous video, or showing how high Anchor Shot can get. And Anchor Shot can get up to actually like 3K or 4K, depending on how much you're building it up. But the other thing to note is that this could also have better epiphanies on it. We got the vulnerable, which unfortunately is more for like the big damage build than versus the multi-hit, but still a nice way to get a little bit of extra damage from this. And then also, each of these hits can crit independently, so you are able to get a little bit of extra damage that way. Now, again, do I think that this is going to be the best way to play him? I'm not sure yet, because I honestly just need to spend more time finding exactly all the right pieces. Getting save data for these to theory test them and to get them actually built out is very difficult, I will say. And of course, once we get the memory fragments and once we can actually get up our crit rate and crit damage, which again is crit chance in this game, our crit chance is very, very low, unfortunately. But when we build this up more, right, we could get even more value out of the go big and making sure that we're just maximizing the damage out of our black holes. So that is the single target variant, as I'll call it, or just the multi-hit, because again, they aren't attacking random enemies, so they could hit anything. But I do want to stress, like, do not sleep on this build. More and more people are slowly starting to realize that thanks to morale or thanks to other buff style of cards, when you have something that says, you know, 100 damage times 5 or whatever it is, right? Once you find ways to amp that up, you can push out a ton of damage. Now, again, the downside of this is that it does require very specific hands or very specific setup that can feel very slow or clunky otherwise to play. Now, to talk about the other build, as we're going to get into the bigger version of Black Hole, this is going to be your all-in nuke style of card. This is going to be, I'm eventually getting up to like a 1300% damage nuke, and then I'm applying vulnerable, which is going to get an even higher multiplier, and just doing one big bomb worth of damage, right? Well, if that's the case, because we're doing so much with the damage stacking, I actually do not like Ray for this build. Now, yes, we are getting the plus 40% damage that I mentioned. We are having ways to draw some cards and tutor up maybe the missing pieces. But what I actually like a bit more, and again, you could use Cassius if you really wanted to, but for me personally, because I have just been on a Veronica kick, but notably, again, having this card just allows us to churn through our deck with much higher consistency. And Kayron is the big boom version, right? Because we don't have the ego skill to rely on for the action point. You definitely need to find the right pieces. And I'll also include an image here of that. Well, you can even get a even better version of this that says a 0 cost draw 3. And when you're playing these all-in combo decks where you have to rely on very specific hands to do any amount of damage, you really just want to focus on an ability to draw through your deck as much as possible every single turn, because again, you are going to be burning all of your resources to eventually get to the black hole and have that big payoff. So I would recommend, if you can get the good epiphany, and if you find it, make sure you're getting a copy of Black Hole into your deck. That is definitely one of your priorities for making an extra copy in both cases here, right? But for Veronica, we could still get things like Leap Attack, which can make itself a 0 cost if you draw into it. I don't recommend this one. It's just something that was really nice that I got during this run. What instead I would recommend is a gear bag. And again, I'll put up an image here of just the example of oops, all gear bags that we had that unfortunately we weren't able to keep at the end of the run. But when we're thinking about what's possible and making sure that you are setting up that first turn play to really go the distance, then you want to make sure you can draw through your entire deck as well as have the action points required to play all the upgrade cards, or to play out all the cards that give you the futility, which then you can, you know, extract and be fine with. Now, I do want to go back to Kayron at the very end, because I do want to stress that his E1, which again, for the sake of this video, you can see it right here. I do not have E1 unlocked. I'm keeping everything on my account at E0 until we know more, other than Veronica. But the Echo of True Abyss, this getting 5 futility cards right off the start instead of just 3, it might not seem like it, but his E1 upgrade is massive for being able to turn on what he wants to be doing, especially for the multi-hit strategy. This means a single echoes into a mass exhaust, and again, it can be through the ego skill, it can be through the retain if you really want to. This automatically turns on Black Hole in all situations, as well as ramps up Black Hole by a 200% increase. So this card is just absolutely nuts when you have the E1, just to give you more copies of it. And again, if you have the partner, which allows you to go into the ego skill, which then removes all of them from your discard anyways, that is just going to go even further for you, which is really nice. So I try to do this one a little bit quicker, a little bit shorter, and straightforward to it. Again, for the potentials, this is going to be the same for every, you know, agent going forward, but make sure you get your 3-1. Make sure you have your level 4 node, because this is your unique damage. This is going to amp up Black Hole even more. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're also caring about his 7, which we'll get at level 60 to get even more critical damage in this case, which will ramp up his damage even more. So that is a quick rundown of the Kayron build guide that I recommend. Again, I will be having a Chaos run up later tomorrow when I actually can record a run, and it will be with difficulty 7 in mind. So we will be trying to progress up to difficulty 8, and well, just keep using Kayron because it turns out having elemental advantage is, well, really good as you might expect. But otherwise, let me know your thoughts. How do you feel about Kayron if you had a chance to build them? Is there something that I've overlooked? Definitely let me know in the comments below. But again, I want to stress at the very end, do not sleep on the multi-hit variant. If you love Ray and if you love min-maxing, there are some absolutely crazy things that you can do. With that out of the way, my friends, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. But until next time, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.